Welcome to another episode of Small Biz Diaries, the podcast where we dive into real talk about the struggles, tips, and community aspects of being an entrepreneur. I'm Esperanza, and today we have a really inspiring guest. Joining us is an award-winning bilingual and bicultural licensed psychologist, celebrated speaker, and insightful writer from Southern California. She's the founder of Calathea Wellness and has been a beacon of change in the mental health community so far. She's on a mission to just demystify and destigmatize therapy and mental wellness, particularly for Latina first-gen professionals, and just so much more. She had recent appearances on Telemundo and Amigos de Univision and has showcased her dedication and expertise, and I really think she's just making huge waves in the mental health field. She's here to share her journey as an entrepreneur and any unique challenges she's faced and how she's kind of navigated through the complex world of running her own business. Get ready for some real talk and really valuable insights, because in this chapter, we're going to be exploring first gen narrative, but entrepreneur edition. And I couldn't be having like a more fitting guest to lead this conversation. It's really an honor to have you, Doctora Lisette Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Esperanza. It is such a treat and such a pleasure to be here with you, speaking on a very important and relevant topic, because I have lots to say about first gens and entrepreneurship and just first gens in general, right? So very excited.
Yeah, and we're both I'm first gen. It's been a big part of honestly my experience as a person, as a daughter, all of the different like aspects of who I am. So now as a business owner, things obviously come up as well. So I'm super excited to kind of just see where your journey started and how it's taken you to where you are now.
Yeah, so let's take it back a little bit, right? So I became a licensed psychologist officially December 2019, and which is like my first big milestone. And we all have certain dreams of what we want to do. And my original big dream was to be a licensed psychologist. And throughout this process, I'm like, I want to be a licensed psychologist. I want to work with first-gen college students. And so I was working at a university counseling center. And I quickly realized that what I thought was my dream was not my dream. I was not living the day-to-day in the way that I wanted it to be. I found myself very burnt out within that system. And a big part of it is because I was often one of the only, if not the few, like Spanish-speaking therapists, Latina therapists. And when you're one of the few and only, then, you're there as a resource. Everyone's seeking you out. Of course, all the students want to work with you. But then I would look at my colleagues' schedules and I would see a huge discrepancy between how heavy my caseload was and then my colleagues. And it was just purely because there was a higher need to work with. People wanted someone who had the cultural sensitivity experience and then their own personal lived experiences. So it's more of a systemic issue. I just want to make sure I name that. But what I quickly realized is, as long as I'm in this system, this problem's not going away. I'm always going to feel a bit overloaded. It's going to be a bit more challenging. And I kept thinking, I want something different. However, I got licensed December 2019, so I didn't, start realizing this until we're in the middle of our global pandemic.
Yeah.
And as challenging as it was, I found myself feeling pushed to my limit. I was in my workplace. I ended up having to take disability leave because I got so sick. I had COVID, then I had complications, and it was all because of the immense amount of stress that I was in. This is not to say that being an entrepreneur is not stressful.
Yeah.
But remember what I mentioned about the systemic pressures and the systemic challenges that I was experiencing. That's more of what shifts, because then you're in your own ecosystem when you change into entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, honestly, my now husband who was the voice of encouragement, because sometimes that's what we need as first gens, like someone to see you and say, hey, you seem a little bit too stressed at this workplace. Have you thought about doing anything on your own, like working for yourself? And then he said to me these words that I think changed my perspective. And he says, those jobs, they're not going anywhere. They will always be there. And right now you have an opportunity and a chance to bet on yourself. And I sat with that and I heard what he said and I thought about it. And I'm like, it's so interesting that my now husband is telling me these things, because these were the lessons that I received from my parents my whole life. I just hadn't connected it. Like, my parents, immigrated, my mom from El Salvador, my dad from Mexico, and they came to this country with nothing, knowing like no one, right? That was them betting on themselves. That was them taking that risk. However, like I hadn't fully connected those dots because I was still in my own survival mode. Remember, I talked about how burnt out I felt. I ended up having to take disability leave. So then I started to take my first baby steps. And I actually officially launched my business in April 2021, but it was a very slow build. So I say this also because I think sometimes we have these perceptions of when we launch, we go at 100%. And that's not necessarily the reality for everyone. And I would say for most first gens, it's probably not because there's so much that we're learning along the way. And so I launched a business. I don't think I had my first client for 2 or 3 months because I was still learning. I didn't have a network. I was in the University Counseling Center and I was transitioning to private practice. At that point, I had gone to school out of state. I had just come back, and so I was building my network here, but all of my connections also worked in systems. So I had to build my network. And so I say this again, you may see people who started private practice, maybe they fill up a bit more quickly, but everyone is on their own timeline. And I've learned that it really is on the connections you make, the support systems that you create. And I didn't have it when I was starting. I had a few people who I could reach out to, and then I built it based on, like what I've learned. And I was like, let's connect, let's network. And again, remember, this is April 2021. So this is still all very virtual. It's a virtual world that we're like navigating and continuing to experience. And then, I slowly built it up. And then as I was building the business, meaning like I created my website, creating all of these things, because when I first started, that was, I guess, how I could pay for things with my time. And as I built and have created more income for myself, now I can outsource, I can begin to pay people. But at the beginning, it just wasn't a possibility for me for various different reasons. My financial status was that what I had was time. So I put time into building everything. And again, I say this to normalize it for anyone listening, is that you work with the currency you have. And you put whatever currency you have that is most valuable to you into this new dream or whatever dream that you have. And as first gens, our currencies have always shifted throughout our lives, right? Sometimes it's our time. Sometimes, it's the familial expectations. But for me at this point, it was time, putting time into it. And then as we came into 2022, that's when I got sick. And that's when I realized, like, I can't do this. My business isn't growing because I can't put any time into it because I'm so overwhelmed at my job. Like, something has to shift. I ended up speaking with a friend of mine, Adriana, who I did a consultation with her, and she founded Latinx Therapy. And she reminded me of that. She said, the time you put in is the time you get back. Can you go part-time at your job? And that was first step one into me fully finding my voice, learning to advocate for myself. And then because I had to take the disability leave, it was essentially I come back part-time or I don't come back. I come back part-time, I don't come back. And that was what I had decided for myself. So I went and spoke with them. They made that adjustment for me. And that was basically the last semester that I worked at that university, because when I transitioned to working part-time, then I finally, one, had more energy for myself to rest. Because like I said, I was feeling burnt out.
Yeah.
And then I had more energy to pour into my business, because just like with anything, you get what you put into it. Pouring into the business, so that in fall 2022, August 2022, I was able to officially give my notice at my job, and was like, it is time for me to fully jump in, completely bet on myself. Alejandra Campoverdi calls it blindfolded cliff jumping. And I want to bring her up because she published her book, First Gen, a memoir. And it's an amazing book that I highly resonated with. And I've now consider her a mentor. Like, I remember when I saw the book, I was like, I need to connect with her. And she's just as amazing as everything you see. So anyway, so I jumped off that cliff, ready for this new adventure. And what I didn't realize is that I think I was so afraid initially, thinking about, oh, there's so much I don't know. Like, how is this going to go? Only to then realize that I was in a very familiar space, because you know what first gens are also really good at is navigating the unknowns. So I'm in an unknown space. And as uncomfortable as that is, it is also familiar. And so, in continuing to navigate entrepreneurship since then, there's a lot that I'm still learning. There's a lot of places in which I'm still growing. But I want, again, to anyone listening who's first gen, you are so prepared for this in ways you don't even know.
First of all, thank you for sharing. That was like a beautiful way of outlining the ebbs and flows of your journey. But when you were speaking, I was like, there's a parallel, right, with our parents coming to this to the country with nothing or with very minimal things, with no roadmap as to like what they're supposed to be doing, where they're supposed to be going, whether they should be spending certain things on like groceries or work. Like they're navigating so many unknowns themselves, that they've also kind of shown us the possibilities, right? Like in their own way. And so the fact that there's so many parallels to that and first gen entrepreneurs, it really does showcase the potential and just strength and resilience that we can continue even when things come up, because we're used to having like a little bit more of these hurdles, or walls we have to break down, things like that. So yeah, I made that connection as you were talking, and I was like, wow, there's kind of a beautiful parallel within that.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that that connection was so clear to you, because I think oftentimes we don't realize it. And I think that's part of that's why when I started, I was like, there's so many strengths about being first gen that make us uniquely qualified to be amazing entrepreneurs. And I'm not talking about the sales. I'm not talking about, any of even doing this podcast episode, right? I'm talking about just like how you build from 0 to 1. Because if anyone knows the 0 to 1 journey, and in fact, sometimes it feels like negative something to 1 journey, it's first gens.
Yeah. Mic drop,
Yeah.
period, exclamation point, all of the things. Yeah, no, agreed, 100,000%. So like, especially looking back at where you started and where you are now, what do you feel like is the biggest thing you're learning or learning to navigate with these new experiences, or the new challenges or interviews or whatever comes to mind with this next chapter within your business?
Yeah, I think that there's something so special about entrepreneurship, as stressful as it may be, when you're like, what's my next step? I I think I love having infinite options and possibilities, and I love being in a space where I can dream bigger than I've ever dreamed before, if that makes sense. And the way that I think about it now is, growing up and in school, I remember hearing and learning about something called the glass ceiling. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, I've heard it.
The glass ceiling. And then I remember at one point I heard someone say, your ceiling is your future generation's floor. And I'm like, yeah, my parents' ceiling is my floor, and I've built up from there. Et cetera, et cetera. And now, Esperanza, I truly believe there is no ceiling. The ceiling is gone. The ceiling has disappeared. And I truly believe, and I don't believe this just for myself. I think that I've accepted the lessons from my ancestors, from my parents, of betting on myself, taking the risks. And I think my motto this week has been, in Spanish, is El que no arriesga no gana.
Mm.
The person who does not take risks does not win.
Mhm.
And I've learned to face my fears every day. Because I say this all the time. It's like I try to be transparent about it with anything that I do when I'm on social media. You see me on Telemundo, you see me on Univision, you see me on all of these different networks, like Latin Nation media. And I tell you all, and I'm gonna keep it real, I'm terrified. Like, I feel so terrified before I feel those moments. Before I had, earlier this week, I recorded something with Univision, and I could feel myself shaking before I had one of my stress balls. I have a bunch of stress balls behind me. I'll grab one now, for example. So I had
Yeah,
one of my stress balls. It's over there. Maybe if I like at the end, if we have time, I'll show it to you. Sorry, they're
yeah,
also my little toys. This is little Winnie the Pooh.
yeah.
But I was like, it was the amount. I was just like, I need to do some things. So I had my stress ball underneath. I was
Oh, I
holding
think
it
it
as I
might.
was doing my interview, and it's just but that's real. And I see that because for me, it's really important to practice what I preach. So if I tell people, like, step out of your comfort zone, I promise it'll feel amazing when you're on the other side. That's what I literally am telling myself constantly, because you don't grow if you don't put yourself out of your comfort zone, if you don't try something new. And again, that's the first gen narrative. All you're doing is trying new things. All you're doing is pushing yourself to grow constantly. And I guess as I hear myself say this, I also want to add that yes, it's a lot of push, yes, it's a lot of grow, but then it's also a lot of pausing to embrace, to taste the fruits of our labor, I guess I'll say. So there's been a lot of moments where I just pause and think of everything I've done over these last, almost 2 years, and almost three or three if we're counting like when I very first started in that kind of slow build. And I feel like a completely different person. I'm entering into, I think people say like the highest version of myself. I've heard people say that all the time. But I think the highest version of ourselves, or the best version of ourselves, is that version that has the utmost belief in ourselves. And like I said, there's no ceiling. So to me, I've won my game. Like, I fully believe that I'm capable of anything. And maybe not right away, because it took time for this, right? It took time. I wanted to be a public speaker. I wanted to do more of these things. And so then I started to do Instagram lives. This is like, if you go back to like, I think 2020, I think I just started. And if you watch those, I am so nervous. I'm so nervous in every single one of them. And I can watch them and watch my confidence grow as I continue to get more comfortable with finding my voice and taking up space. But the way that I'm speaking to you about all of this now is only possible because that version of me 3 years ago did it all, even though she was afraid, and trusted that she would figure it out.
It's so true, because I remember when, I mean, obviously as first gen, right, you don't have someone to compare or reference, right? Like, my sister did this, or I should potentially do this because this is what people have done before in the past. So there's no roadmap. So I remember growing up as most first gen here. You have to go to college, you have to go to high school, and then you have to go to college, and then you have to get a really good 9 to 5 job. And I remember specifically after college getting my first full-time job and thinking and feeling very just unmotivated, unchallenged, unfulfilled. And I was like, why am I just checking off these boxes? Like, who told me that I have to be checking off these boxes? And also, why can't I make my own boxes? And so that was a like unpacking that I had to do, that I realized, you know what, yes, I'm very appreciative of all the things that have gotten me here. And at the same time, there's so much more that I'm able to explore by taking a risk. So, I quit my 9 to 5. At the time, I went to go travel and teach English in Southeast Asia, just to like get my bearings and try to go back to grounding myself and knowing, like, okay, what are the things that I'm passionate about? What are the things that inspire me? Um, but I remember being so scared because I was like, my parents and family have put so much towards getting me to this point, and now I'm just like throwing it all away. Not all the way, but not going on the path that is typical, because I did, when I was navigating that decision, I was like, well, I could go get my master's. I could just try to find another job, those things that societal structures have shown us might be a good next step to kind of increase your career and things like that. But it took a lot to realize that, like, that's not where I wanted to be, and make my own path forward, like try to figure out what my path was, and navigating those challenges, and taking those risks. And I feel like all of that is what has helped me get to being my own boss and doing my own thing and consistently trying to dream and come up with new things that I can do. So I I just resonate with all of that so much in my own way, obviously, and I think many others like can as well. And that's where the reflection component and like really taking a step back and realizing we can't be on autopilot, or we shouldn't be on autopilot all the time. trying to figure out like what can you do, be mindful of that moment and see what might be next for you. I just felt like I really wanted to share that part because I definitely think that that is what resonated as you spoke.
Thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey, because I think about how it's scary, not just for us, but also to our loved ones when they see us make these different decisions. I know many times, like, they're like, couldn't you just have gotten a raise at your job? Couldn't, like, you're losing out on your like benefits, you're doing this because, by the way, my husband is also an entrepreneur. We both have our own businesses, which means neither of us is in the system, which when you're not in the system, you don't get what I've learned to refer to as golden handcuffs, but there are, the benefits associated, right? With like the
Right.
health insurance, with the,
401k.
like with this, like, retirement benefits, all of these things. But I did my research and realized you don't need to be in the system to access these things. You just have to budget for them and create a budget and acknowledge that these are not expenses that you'll take on, for your retirement or your insurance or whatever that might be. So I guess I say this, it is scary, not just for us, it's scary for the people around us, because their dream was always to have people, like, to have their, the next generation have a lot of stability. And there's not a lot of perceived stability in entrepreneurship. And, it depends, right, on the field you're in, what kind of entrepreneur you are. So the ebbs and flows are truly there. And again, if you you get what you put into it. And so when you start realizing that a certain direction is not working, first gens, we adapt. We're resourceful. We figure it out. That's what you need in entrepreneurship. You're like, hey, this isn't working. I need to make a shift. I need to pivot, right? So a big pivot for me was, initially I was private pay only, and I thought, this isn't working for me in the way that I wanted to. I'm not reaching the people I want to work with. And if I think about my first thought of how I look for a therapist, it's through health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to get paneled with health insurance so that that's how I can serve the population I want to be working with. And people have strong mixed opinions on that. But for me, that's what worked for me. And that, like, is what helped me get to the space where I felt safe to leave my full-time job and do the whole bet on myself full-time.
Yeah. I can imagine the logistics too is just hard, like navigating those, right? While still trying to make sure you're not losing your voice and the impact you want to make. One of the things you said when I asked you about like where you are now in your business, you mentioned you're at the point now where all of these possibilities are just exciting and you have all of these options that directions you can go in, and that part is exciting. But what would you say to someone that's maybe thinking the opposite, like, I have too many options, I don't know where to go, I
Mhm.
feel anxious because there's so many directions I could go in. I'm just thinking like on the opposite front, like, is there any advice you would give to someone that's like within that world of entrepreneurship but feeling anxious with the opportunities or options they have?
Yeah, I guess it's what I heard that first time. I think when we start to feel anxious, we have to know that that's coming from somewhere, and it's likely coming from a scarcity. Like, if I don't do this now, it's going to go away. That opportunity won't be there later. And recognize that it will be. And so everything that you want to do is still possible. It just might be in different seasons. It's hard to do it all at once and do it well. It's so much more helpful when you can focus. So, let's say you're in your business, and, I think of an easier example that comes to mind is thinking of even social media. I love being on social media. I like have fun with it. And when it's not fun, I take a break. And but what I've heard all the time is, choose one platform and focus all on that one platform. And when you feel good there, then you can fluctuate with others, right? So maybe you choose Instagram, and then you're having FOMO of, you see everyone posting on TikTok, or everyone posting on LinkedIn, or everyone posting, on Be Real. And you're like, I want to be doing all of them. I want to do all of them. But those platforms, well, to my knowledge, aren't going anywhere. I say this, I was like, okay, I
Right,
get it.
little
There's a lot,
asterisks,
there's
yeah.
little aspects, but the opportunity to connect with people on different social platforms, I should say then, will always be there. And you just have to choose the one that resonates with you the most. because again, wherever you pour in, that's where you're going to see the best outcomes. And spreading yourself out too thin is the recipe for burnout.
Mm-hmm. And
So,
oftentimes I think because, or at least personally for me, I've had to translate documents for my parents. I've had to call the doctors. I've had to juggle all of these different things that I feel like oftentimes we think we need to do the same. And obviously, as entrepreneurs, there's a lot of hats we have to wear, but at the same time, there is a fine line, like you said, of like spreading yourself too thin. And you have to learn when it might be time to delegate, or for example, or like when it might be time where like you understand the finances of your business, but you're spending too much time on them, and it might be time to delegate that to someone else that might be able to help you so you can gain more time doing other parts of your business that you love.
yeah.
But again, first gen, like you're used to having to do so many things. So you're just like, yes, I can do it all. Si se puede. I can do everything.
Yeah, we can, but doesn't mean you should. And you know what? Something that I'm so glad you caught on to this because I like was thinking about this. There's this African proverb that I think most people have heard by now, but it's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And when you're building a business, you can only get so far doing it all on your own. You want to go further, then that's when you delegate. That's when you bring people onto your team, or you hire someone to help you gain more clarity. And so, and I'll give an example. I've had this like dream or want to create a community for first gen BIPOC therapists, but I knew it was a big dream, and I would look at everything I had, and I'm like, I have a lot of big dreams, and I'm manifesting some of them, but I can't do it all at once, and still have the quality of life that I like, because I like to not work 80-hour weeks. I like to sleep. I like to have breaks. I like, I say all of this, and um, I treat my business sometimes part-time because sometimes I'm like, this is my travel season, so I'm not going to be doing as much, right? But so I wanted to do this, and I was meeting with people, and I realized we had a similar dream, and that they also were interested in starting out something like this and doing that. And I thought, well, I know that I don't have the capacity to do this by myself.
Mm,
But if I'm doing this with my comunidad, and I'm doing this with other people who have the same passion, who have the same drive, then I'm willing to try. And so we tried. We have our official first launch event, like coming up soon. But we've officially launched. It's starting as a Facebook group right now, but it's first gen BIPOC therapists, and our goal is to hold personal and professional development for first gen BIPOC therapists, and being in community, and also just to help with networking and building, and having essentially these kinds of conversations, but very niche down to first gen BIPOC therapists.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of like what you said with when you were starting off in your own journey of, private, um, or like private
Private
practice.
pay. Yeah,
Yeah.
private pay
Versus,
versus sure.
yeah, exactly. Versus going off on your own. I mean, you didn't have as many resources as you would have liked or wanted to be able to ask questions or be curious about the process, or I'm sure there's other logistics that just it would be nice to have, right? To be able to communicate with someone or just share
Mhm.
your experiences with others. So no, it's such a great example, and that's exciting. That sometimes in community too, having a couple of hands in the pot helps
Yeah.
with having it become even more of a passion project. Um,
Yes, yes. And we all have different strengths, and being able
mhm,
to lean on each other's strengths and being able to learn from each other. It's like we talked about when you're first gen and you're used to being one of the few and only, you're also used to doing it all on your own.
mhm,
And I say so I'm like, I know I can do it on my own. But I'm an eldest daughter, so I'm tired of doing it all by myself. And I'm so happy to be able to do projects and collaborate. I think this is why I love having conversations like these, and joining in this kind of community, because you could have this conversation also on your own. You could
mhm.
share all this information, but there's just something that's so powerful about providing the space for each other.
It's 100% true. With Small Biz Diaries, we typically talk about, real talk or struggles. So I kind of want to transition towards the end of this to
Mhm.
say, is there something that you're currently really struggling with, or something that you're trying to overcome within your own business that you'd love to share?
Yeah, yeah. I with my business, there's all of the fun stuff, and I love doing the fun stuff. But then, there's a lot of tedious work that comes along with it. My admin, my like documentation when I see my clients, and that I am behind on. And it's something that I'm actively working on, finding my rhythm to find how to keep up with all of the paperwork that I come up. And it's hard because when it's my documentation as a therapist, that's not really something I can outsource. That's
Mhm.
something that I have to do on my own. So I share this with when I have areas I can outsource, I've learned to do that. But that was also really hard to hire someone to do certain things for me. They're like, well, I can do this. It's like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so recently I hired someone to redo my website. She did an amazing job. She created some small templates for me to have for social media that now I have as a resource and just need to sit down and have a batch day. And so it's, but I think my biggest challenge right now is how to create blocks of time to help me stay on track with all of my admin and with my, specifically my therapy notes. And again, keeping it real, like it is
Yeah.
hard to do it all. And it is the last thing I want to do. So I will also take accountability that there's moments that I'm like, so I don't want to do this. Like it's so much. I want to just sit with my people and work with them. But this is also a part of it, and so I'm actively working on navigating that better and giving myself grace. But I will say sometimes I get a little hard on myself and think you should be kept up with this. Don't fall behind. And then I remind myself that I'm only human and that, that it's okay. It's okay to have pending items and we just have to learn how to prioritize and create more time for it.
Yeah, especially I think I'm sure for you, you have a lot of different like parts of your business where you're flexing certain muscles in one versus the other. So it
Yeah.
you have the fun part of the conversations, and then you'd have to switch your mental block to focus on the like sit down and write or type or whatever, and that's a completely different like
Mhm.
mindset shift.
Exactly.
So yeah, I can imagine in practice it's probably a lot more difficult. Like I'm sure what I've heard has helped is developing a little like routine for yourself,
Mhm.
depending like glam- glamorizing it or just being like, I'm gonna get a coffee every time I do like admin
Yeah.
work. Or I'm gonna sit down and um treat myself to something after I do admin work. So
My own reward system. I know, but it's hard. It's
oh
hard.
yeah. Oh
So,
yeah.
but yeah, but that's part of the real talk. So
Oh
we're working on it, finding the balance and trying solutions. And I will say that is actually one of my goals in therapy. I'm in therapy myself because like I think it's just as important for the health service provider to be receiving the health services themselves. And so that's actually something I'm working with my therapist right now. It's like how do we create the routine, the structure? What do I need to help me get back on track?
yeah. I feel so inspired, but also just very like at peace with the fact that so many things within first gen that I've experienced and um is really a part of the process, like the flow of incorporating or implementing them as strengths within my own business because we have the practice, right? We've had to work on those things just because of life, and now we get to call them our strengths and put them into practice. So it's just been very like validating and just I that's truly what I feel, which I think is so helpful within the community of entrepreneurship because sometimes you can feel alone and you can feel like some things you're on a hamster wheel and you're just trying to get through something, but at the same time, like pairing that up and realizing that those are your strengths and you can get through it on the other side because of everything that you've already been through is just um very inspirational, I think.
I thank you for saying that, and I also want to say is that like I'm inspired by seeing everyone chase their dreams, and so I just do what I see, and so I see you chasing your dreams, and I'm like, me too. I can do it too. I can chase my dream too. And there's room for all of us to have big dreams, you know? And so my DMs are always open to like check in with people. You want to share your dream with me? I'm always happy. I love hearing people's dreams. I love hearing people's wins. And I genuinely find so much inspiration in seeing people like do the work.
I'm going to be dropping all of your links so that people can reach out to you and connect with you. But yeah, it's just been such an honor to chat and have this conversation. I really appreciate your time and just your energy and being so present. Is there anything else that you'd want to share, you want to leave off with for advice, for anything that you didn't mention that comes to mind?
I think just generally a theme I think I'm noticing in things that I say is, or in the work that I do and how I make my decisions, is around, you know, my big dream used to be to want to open certain doors for myself, right? To get into those rooms, to like make these certain big changes. And the more I do this kind of work, the more I realize that the dream and the real dream is creating our own spaces where there, from the start, all of your values are ingrained in it. And, you know, I so much thought I wanted to be in all of these rooms, and sure, welcome me in those rooms, but I want to be in my room. I want to be in Esperanza's room. I want to be in the rooms that are being built by first gens, by BIPOCs, by like anyone who was ever told that their dream was not possible. I want to be in your room and I want to see that dream come true.
Yeah, that's so special. Thank you so much. I completely agree. There's room for everybody.
So much
Really, truly. The world is too big.
too big.
Too
Yeah,
big.
too big.
But oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much again, Doctora Lisette. It was such a pleasure. But I really appreciate you being on Small Biz Diaries and just peeling back the layers of your business and how you've gotten to where you've gotten to, and just the first gen narrative as well. Everything truly. So thank you so much.